Yeah, a question would be, so during meditation, I got to a place where the mind is just quiet and I'm tending to how my body feels and how the breath feels. And I've seen that the mind isn't really accustomed to that. So it's okay, now what? Feels I need to do something. Uh, uh, I don't know, should I be looking for like a special state? I think I shouldn't, so I think that's just fine, but I'm just not accustomed to it. I I'm not particularly sure about how first jhana feels actually. I'm a bit confused about the feeling of that.
Okay. Let us say that it would be a natural progression of first jhana as first jhana develops. In the beginning, it's like everything else, especially within the Buddhist context, is that you have the path and then the fruit. So the path then of the first jhana would be to be developing the skills that will bring about that state of satisfaction. Okay, and then the fruit would be that satisfaction or maintaining that
All right.
satisfaction. And that what you're beginning to mention is that there are moments at that time when the mind will immediately jump back into the hindrance, and this time the hindrance is this all there is? You mean the satisfaction is all I get? I don't get any more than satisfaction? Or it can be expressed in the form of, uh, yeah, but now I'm tired of satisfaction. I want some action.
Yeah, I think something along those lines.
All right.
Hmm.
Well, the first thing that we have to recognize is that that is the old mind coming back. That's the hindrance. And its intention is to bring you back to the state that you normally are in, which would be the state of wanting, the state of dissatisfaction, or
Mhm.
whatever like that. And so we have to kind of develop mindfulness in a new way, and also the reluctance to say, no, I really
Mhm.
like it here. This is really nice. That's part of the development then at the level of the fruit of first
Mhm.
jhana, is
Okay.
to really like it so much that you want to keep it, you want to maintain it,
Mhm.
that it really is satisfying.
Okay.
And then, but the mind will wander away again. And the idea then is to, okay, don't let it wander too far, or we're going to lose the satisfaction. Let's bring it back and take another deep breath and be
Mhm.
satisfied again. And so this is where we develop that skill of keep reminding ourselves, to keep remembering that when the mind wanders away, to catch it when it starts to wander in. That in fact, I sometimes use the analogy of a bouncer at a bar, a popular bar. And the first job of the bouncer is to stand at the door and check out who's
Mhm.
going to be allowed in. And so that would be on guard. But sometimes at the bar, somebody gets in and then they get drunk or get rowdy or something. And now the bouncer has to really do his job, and that is to bounce them out.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's also a two-step process, or a two-stage process. That if you're sharp, then you're going to uh, throw those thoughts out as soon as they arise. As
Mhm.
soon as they come to the door, you're saying, nope, I've got better things to think about, including nothing at all.
Mhm.
But if the thought comes in and starts making noise and a racket before it catches your attention, then it's going to be a little bit more work.
Mhm.
But the important thing is to catch it. And then you can say, you can nab it with the
Mhm.
idea of, aha, I caught you.
Mhm.
There you go, you misbehaving thought. This is a happy bar. That we only sell happy drinks here. We don't sell that kind of stuff. And so we bounce those kind of inappropriate thoughts out. Now, that we're able to maintain it, then the next possible thing to do would be either to just sit there and maintain that state, or you can go into a place where there's not so much thinking. Mostly it's thoughts that take us away, but also emotions or feeling can do it. An example of that would be anxiety, or a loud noise goes off, and if people are still at the level of experiencing startle reactions or fear, then when the noise will happen, then that will take them out of the meditation. But it's not the noise that takes them out, it's their reaction to the noise. All right. Can't blame it on the noise. But we can blame it on what's happening on the inside of the mind. Now, let's say that we've got all of those factors together and that we can maintain it. Then the next thing we can start to do is working with the breath. We can start guarding the mind for more and more thoughts, in the sense of the fewer the thoughts and the tighter the circle of thoughts get, the better. So that we begin to think about, strongly thinking about, I don't mean strongly in the sense of forced work like that, but rather in the sense that of the intention. Our intention is to watch the breath and help to allow the breath, through a method that we're about to discuss, to take the mind so completely onto the breath that at one point on the end of the out breath, before the next in breath happens, the mind comes to a complete stop.
Okay.
That it'll just come to a rest. That you can begin to practice it that way is, as I breathe in joy, and as I breathe out, I relax. And then we just use the word relax on the out breath. And soon we come to the state of relax. And then at the end, then there's no more thoughts that come up. Now, as soon as you recognize that, the very first thing to happen is eureka. Wow, the mind has actually stopped. I did it. That, at best, will pull you out of jhana again, or at least out of that second jhana, because there's the mind going. You said, I stopped. It takes a while for the mind to stop. You recognize that it stopped, and you can keep it stopped. But that takes a long time. What I mean by a long time, of breath after breath after breath, after every long breath out. The first goal then would be that I'm going to keep the mind in that quiet state where it's not doing active thinking until the next in breath, just a short time. Okay. Holding the out breath. And as the out breath is out, the mind is quiet. And then the next realization would be the taking then of the in breath. That second jhana in the beginning, in the path of the second jhana, is that we've got to get the mind really, really quiet. And it's really hard to do that when we're thinking about the breath. So you can naturally expect it to start up again as you're beginning to take in that next in breath. But then that in breath is going to be like only down to one word, like joy. Starts with, this is great. This is joy. Joy is the next in breath. Okay. And so on the out breath, it would be relax, relax again, so that as the out breath comes, then the mind gets quiet again. This is a training which has to be practiced over and over and over again. And then someday soon, you'll be able to keep it quiet when that next in breath comes. But if it does come, then you want to be coming in with just one word, which would be joy. Or
That's all right.
And then the out breath is ah.
Okay.
And that will help to develop the second jhana.
All right.
And that's the way that it's done. But the second jhana is then going to have factors of it that makes it truly second jhana. But the other factors that we're talking about were actually developed in the first jhana.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the rapture or the sukha and the piti and the sukha. In other words, complete satisfaction. So when the mind goes quiet, you really begin to enjoy that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that success actually then will become part of the experience of the body. Because now that the mind is quiet, you're actually going to have nothing left to do but to be attentive to the feelings. And that's when they start to explode.
All right.
That's the okay. So the path of second jhana is using the breath to get the mind completely quiet, and then the fruit of the second jhana is an explosion of feelings. Now that explosion is not an explosion of the feelings themselves; it's an explosion of your awareness of those
Mm-hmm.
feelings. In the sutta, the Buddha talks about the second jhana by using the term that we would call an artesian well or a spring,
Mm-hmm.
where water naturally springs out of the ground. Now, sometimes it springs out of the ground in just a tiny little trickle, maybe even a drop by drop by drop. But sometimes, especially in the springtime, it will come out gushing. It will just whoosh
All
like
right.
that. And so often the farmers then will, because of the terrain, will build a dam around that well, that spring, that artesian well, so that it becomes a pond. It's a regular pond, except that now it's fed from an underground
Uh-huh.
spring. Now, I don't know if they have much of those in Europe, but in America, they're fairly common.
Yeah, I don't think we have that many of those nearby. But oh
You
well.
would put in the mountains. This
Mm-hmm.
is also a feature of the mountains because you've got to have high ground
Mm-hmm.
to push the
Okay.
water down strong enough to where it's actually going to be gushing out.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the mountains, you'll find this, or at the base of a high hill, or maybe even at the base of a plateau,
Mm-hmm.
where all the water from the whole plateau is seeped down and then found a crevice. And now this artesian well over the centuries or millennia has now gotten a huge channel. So at certain times of the year, it really comes up. Okay. This is the analogy that the Buddha uses for second jhana. Now, here's how it works. The pond or the body of water that is built around that because of the dam works that's done means that you're going to have a differential in temperature that is not going to be constant. That on the
Okay.
surface with the sun, it's going to be warm, but when you go down to the depths where that
Mm-hmm.
well is, it's going to be cold. It's also the water's going to be moving. It might not bubble, but it's going to be
Uh-huh.
very, very, very fluid, and it is going to be swirling around. All right. And so what happens is that the folks who know about this, especially the teenagers, they love to go diving
Oh, okay.
in this well or in this wellspring that has this pond. So they go to swimming in the pond and dive down to the where this well is, and it's just exuberating. It's just all
Uh-huh.
over the place. It's just really, it's a complete bodily experience. This is what then is referred to as piti when it becomes a physical sensation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we're a victim to this wellspring, but rather we delight in being in the middle of it.
Okay.
All right. So it's a delightful experience, and it also has the experience of being completely successful in the sense of, wow, this is really nice, without necessarily the thought of, wow, it's really
Oh,
nice. It's
okay.
the direct experience of, wow, this is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so in reality, while this, let us say the jhana dude is sitting there on the floor, the physical experience that he will have will be that the hairs on his arm will start to stand up and tingle.
Okay.
He'll have what they call goosebumps, except that it's not a tingling from the arm going to sleep, but it's rather the follicles of the hair standing up on their end. Another example of it would be cold chills coming up and down
Okay.
the back.
Mhm.
Experience of that. In fact, this is what the Hindus call the Kundalini, the
Mhm.
rising of Kundalini. But the Kundalini, these physical feelings we're talking about, the basis of that was developed in the first jhana.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
that is the feeling of success.
Mhm.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the mental state of success and give it to the body to experience.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So it's actually the deep level body experience of success that feels like, ooh. It has the feeling of bringing things up in the sense of cold. In fact, this is one of the practices uh, where, especially Tibetans, but others will do it also, is the monks will go out in the cold
Uh-huh.
just to have that feeling of the intensity of the cold, even to the point of shivering. And then we stop the shiver and just let the body be cold. All right. So
Mhm.
this is how it goes. So that so this rapture or pity of the second jhana does have the quality of coolness,
Okay.
coldness, shaking. Uh, uh, it has the quality of the hair standing on end. Some monks will even have it to the point that you can see them. You can stand behind at the back of the hall and you can see this guy just going through all kinds of gyrations
Okay.
because he's experiencing this second jhana. Well, those feelings then, because we're paying so much attention to them with the thought part of the mind brought to a rest, you could also say that what's really going on is that while the frontal cortex, the adult part of the mind, the supercomputer, is full on and watching the show, the super ego or the vocal part of the mind begins to get really quiet
Mhm.
so that you can see the action on the stage. That mostly we're paying so much attention to the dialogue that we don't see the action.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Some movies are actually all about the action, and it doesn't matter a word as anybody's ever said. Just, let me go past the love scene. I want to see the action. So then that's what this second jhana is. It's all about the action. Because the superego or the thought state has come to a rest. And what that means then is that the id, if we're using Freudian language, has a ball. Complete freedom. Mom is gone. No more authority figures. Nobody telling me what to do. I can just bounce, enjoy, and play. Okay, so it's actually the freedom of the id that gives those feelings that come uh, that are used in that example of the concept of the artesian well.
All right. Huh.
And it has a quality of coolness. It has the quality of excitement. But a better word than excitement is enthusiasm, that we really fully enjoy this. And that we want to stay and maintain in that set of second jhana and go back into it as often as we can to give the id as much freedom in those feelings as possible, because these are really they have two qualities. One is that they're very pleasant feelings. This is really, really good stuff.
All right.
And second, that whole issue is manufactured. These are skills to be developed. And so the more that you work with the second jhana, then the better at it that you'll get.
Mhm.
Until the id feels satisfied now with this explosion of delight, this explosion of freedom. And so that's when eventually, over the course of months, then that pity and rapture of the second jhana will melt. And it will go into the third jhana. Now, the third jhana has the qualities of all that we've been talking about, except that now the analogy is like a lotus flower that is under the flood of a brook. Okay, all of these feelings are just whooshing, 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 whooshing by, and now the lotus has a strong enough limb or twig at the bottom that it actually rises out of the deluge. And there, when the lotus opens, it is free. It does not have any water drops even. It is not soaking wet. That's the amazing thing. Okay. Real lotuses are like that. You can have them buried in the water for some reason, and when they come out, they're dry. This is also the way that we would work with third jhana, in the sense that when the feelings subside, now we can go into a state of emptiness that has strength to it, that we know that the feelings are there and that we're aware of them, but we're mostly aware of just sitting. This is truly zazen. The just sitting is done in third jhana.
Okay.
It's not done in fourth jhana because there's nobody much to sit with when you're in the fourth jhana. That's when out of the body, when you become completely mental. That means that now, first off, it's the, you could think of it like this. Number one step is to wake up the frontal cortex.
All right.
Get the wrist part of the mind going. That's what we want to do. That's what first jhana is all about, is wake the mind up, get it going, give it some energy, give it some power. And now the second jhana is the shutting down of the superego, the shutting down of the vocal part, which would also correlate to the brain as the animal or the mammalian part of the brain, which is the side cortex, the temporal. Okay. This area is around here. All right, it's still the gray matter, but it's not. It's the part that yak, 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 and that we're turning that off, which now leaves the good feelings of the reptilian brain to come up and flower and really go online. So then the third jhana is when the feeling part of the reptilian brain begins to shut down, leaving only the, let us say, the brain stem and the bodily parts and the bodily functions and all of that is what is left. When we're going into fourth jhana, then we leave the body behind. This is where we have to completely abandon anapanasati, because the breath now is so refined that it's undetectable.
Okay.
And you don't need it now because everything else is shut down. In fact, a lot of the effort and a lot of the energy of the oxygen is from the yakking mind and the feeling mind, as well as the observing mind. But now we have just that frontal cortex. It's got only one job to do, and that's to watch, to note, to observe. And what is it going to observe? What are the things of looking at it? Well, the first thing to understand is that the body itself is boundless. That we are so connected to our environment that there is no truly distinguishing the boundary between the body and the environment, that we're in it and it is in us. And so that sense of space, now it's wrongly translated out of the Pali as infinite space, when what we're talking about is boundlessness, that there is no boundary but in the spatial situation, that I'm just sitting, that the Buddha uses the analogy of, imagine that the body is completely covered with a white sheet that is shimmering, a shimmering white sheet. And so there you are as just Mr. Jhana Dude Blob a blob of white, shimmering, living being that's beyond feelings and beyond thought.
Okay.
And it's just vibrating, just shimmering, a shimmering white. Uh, um, you can think of it as a sheet or a covering,
Mm.
or you can think of it as a ghost-like thing,
Okay. Hmm.
because the
Okay.
body is beginning to disappear. Is beginning to disappear, is no longer rising, falling, touching, and sitting, because the touching quality is beginning to fade away, the sitting quality is beginning to fade away, and the rising and falling has faded away, and yet there is still this fourth jhana. And one of the base qualities of it is that it has no boundary, or that the boundary between the body itself and the environment is such that we begin to puff out.
All right.
Some
Huh.
people call this an aura.
Mm-hmm.
It's when your boundaries of your body get loose, that our energy flows are different now, because we're not in the sense of containment, we're in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of exuberance. All right. The next step about it is that we begin now to focus on the only thing that's left much to focus on, and that is the mind itself and how it operates.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that we're going to start noticing is consciousness, and how consciousness itself is boundless. It's not infinite consciousness, it's boundless consciousness, in the sense that it does not get stuck on anything, because there's really nothing left for it to stick to, and so it's kind of like just bouncing around.
Okay.
All right. The next part of it would be what is called neither perception nor non-perception, because the neither perception or non-perception means just enough perception to perceive that there is consciousness,
Okay.
and that you recognize that to come out of the jhana is to start adding these objects for consciousness to attach to.
Okay.
All right, that's when the coming out of the jhana is, because now there's something to become a conscious of, and that the Buddha talks about this in the sense of when the seeing is merely the seen,
Mm-hmm.
and the hearing is merely the heard. This is very much associated with fourth jhana, because the perception at that fourth jhana is that we know that there is seeing, but there's nothing to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
We know that there is hearing, but there is nothing to be heard, but there is enough perception
Mm-hmm.
that it can perceive consciousness itself.
All right.
And the final point then is when that even goes to the point of there's not much left of anything. It's gone now. We can call this really nothing. There's just nothing there. Or nothingness, emptiness, real sunyata.
Okay.
And in fact, everything that is not sunyata was just stuff that I was doing, just activity. And so when you get down to that state of nothing, that's when things are truly at rest. Now, there is no reason for people to practice these four jhanas before they practice insight. In fact, if they do it that way, it'll take them, if they're good at it, 20 years or more.
Okay.
But if we're practicing vipassana correctly, then the jhanas become a natural outcome of the progress of vipassana.
Okay. Huh.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's
Yeah,
more
I've
like
never
that the
heard that.
jhana dude doesn't really know what he's doing. He's just sitting there, and the jhanas have to sort of do it to him, and eventually it might happen if he sits there long enough. To where with the insight method, we actually know what these jhanas are. We're watching them as they happen. We've got
Okay.
the tools to make them happen. And that in the process of doing so, we're gaining more and more insight.
Okay.
This is what the Buddha calls the direct method. And in the Pali, Ekamago, and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa uses the term shorthand or
Ah.
shortcut. And when I heard Santikaro use that word shortcut, I says, he's making that up. That's not what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa said. But now I found in Thai, oh no, that actually not only did
Okay.
Bhikkhu Buddhadasa use the word shortcut in the way that we mean shortcut, but that's how the Pali is translated into Thai.
Okay.
It's not translated as the direct method, it's translated as the shortcut method, the really direct method. So imagine it like a triangle.
Okay.
The triangle, you have point A goes down to point B and then over to point C.
Mm.
And the distance between point A and
Okay.
point C is called the hypotenuse.
Mm-hmm.
This is what gives us x squared. So that x squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. And we also know that the shortcut or the direct method that cuts, let's say you've got a city block and the city block has no buildings on it at all. It's easier to get from this corner to that corner over there by just cut straight across that field. Don't go down the road, which is all in squares. All right. So this is the way that we're actually practicing directly. This is the Vipassana method, is as you go along in your Vipassana, in your insight, the depth of your meditation in the sense of jhana deepens
Okay.
almost automatically. But for sure, it happens as we intend it to because we know what we're doing and how to get there. As opposed to the old method, the way that the Buddha did it was go from A to B and then from B to C, which was the long method. And he found that going from A to B or doing the jhanas wasn't liberating. The jhanas aren't liberating. That it's the insight that's liberating. But once you're liberated, hey, jhanas are nice. That's a nice toy. This human mind is a really interesting, playful tool to play with. And so, and besides, now that we've gotten to the point through insight of knowing that there's not really much to do and no place to go, hey, let's sit here and really enjoy the heck out of our moment. Let's go into the jhanas. All right, so people say that I'm not into jhanas. No, I'm into jhanas in the natural progression.
All right.
But the first jhana is the key. That's the big dude. That's the tool. Because we can't walk around in fourth jhana. I had a guy one time saying on the internet that he got that he was driving when he went into fourth jhana. And I'd say, hey, dude, if I was a cop, I'd stop you. DWJ. That, in fact, you cannot drive a car while you're in jhana. That's the same thing as really being out of it because you don't have any eyes, you don't have any ears, you don't have any feelings, you don't have any fear, you don't have anything. Not a good idea. Not only that, but while you're operating an automobile, you can't get into those kind of states. That it takes some stillness. And it starts with first jhana, and then going into second jhana, and then going into third jhana. Is sort of like this, that you've got a train, and the faster the train moves is like going from zero, which is nothing, into first jhana, you get it moving. So first thing you got to do is you got to get the engine fired up.
Okay.
All right. And then the next thing you do is that you release the boxcar. The back end of the train, we don't need it anymore. And then we move up a bit, and then we say, all right, the passenger compartment, we don't need that anymore. And to really get things going, that's when we just release everything except the even the even the gold treasure that's on the train right behind. Nope, that goes too. The only thing that's left is now the engine. And so that's the way of looking at the jhana. So you can't get into fourth jhana by doing, like driving a car. You can't do that. You have to get the mind quiet. Everything settled down, more and more settled. This is the right way to practice. And so we do it by spending most of the time in that first jhana as our reference point. to really begin to like that, because the more than likely thing that's going to happen, which is exactly what you're talking about, is that you get tired of even the pleasure of jhana. Well, that's not going to take you into second jhana. You've got to be really ripped. You got to be really stoked, really satisfied. And so we need to start developing that. So when the thoughts of boredom come, say, hey, I see you, Mr. Boredom. I'm going to take yet another deep breath and enjoy the heck out of the next moment, too. And so that's the way that we do it. We have to keep practicing over and over and over again to get ourselves into a state of great joy.
All right.
For the Christians in the crowd who are listening to this video, think of it, in fact, as the atmosphere around us is like being filled with God, that God is all around. And when we take in a deep breath, we're breathing in God. We're breathing in the really good juice. I said, one guy, what we need to do, instead of putting up these posters of the Buddha, we need to put up a poster called O2. Meaning O2. And put them up all over the house. And every time I see that sign, oh, thank you, Mr. Air. Thank you for reminding me I need to breathe. So we see that, and remember, it's really all in the first jhana is all about the breath. To get the mind energized, to wake it up, so that we can really take a look at what's going on. And when our mindfulness becomes unremitting, which means it keeps coming back and it keeps coming back and it keeps coming back over and over and over again, we keep pounding it in, then our ability to see what's going on, our investigation, also becomes unremitting.
All right.
And they work together. Without the unremitting to remember to investigate, unremitting investigation don't happen.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, and so when we get that, and it becomes a habit, then instead of being an effort like it is now, it's still an effort, but that effort is going to get easier and easier to the point that it's automatic. It's almost like it's energetic now. All I have to do is remember it. Oh, okay. So that's the way that we start to work with it. And so the unremitting energy, or the unremitting easy effort, then is what allows us to have real satisfaction. That's when piti comes in.
Okay.
All right. And the unremitting piti means that we begin to feel really good. Now, basically what I have just done is I've covered the first 4 items on the Sambhojana.
All right.
The Sambhojana is the 7 factors of enlightenment. The first one is unremitting sati. Now, right noble sati, along with right noble view, is the intention or the path. When sati becomes an enlightenment factor, in other words, when it's really working, it's working because it's consistent. It keeps coming back and it keeps coming back. And it'll go away for a breath or two and it comes back again. You remember. You keep remembering. So that one guy said, during the waking day, most people will be breathing about 14,000 times. How many of them are you mindful of?
Oh. Okay.
Okay. When mindfulness becomes unremitting, that means we'll probably well over the 1,000 mark.
Okay.
Well over the 1,000 mark, so that we'll catch about 1 every 15 breaths. That's really good mindfulness. Not much is going to happen in 15 breaths before mindfulness reoccurs. So I'm not using that as a goal, but rather an example of what we mean by unremitting mindfulness. This is why it's the number 1 skill to be developed, is to keep remembering. And we've got an immediate goal in mind. That immediate goal is that rapture, that piti, that sukha, that pleasure. of first jhana. And when, instead of like the way that you're practicing first jhana, you're actually quite thrilled and excited when it happens one time
Yeah.
or twice. But what we're looking for is for that too to become unremitting. That's when real tranquility sets in. When the
All right.
tranquility itself, or what we mean by at rest, at peace, or relaxed. So we practice that out breath, that relaxing breath. But when we remember to keep practicing it over and over again, then we get really relaxed. When that happens, now the next thing that happens is that we become balanced, equanimity, and also finally the mind is unified, and we call that unremitting samadhi. So unremitting samadhi of the seven factors of enlightenment is the same samadhi as the right noble samadhi, but that's to be practiced anytime. Anytime that you can get the mind unified, there it is. That's noble. But now we're talking about being able to do it unremittingly. All right. And so these are the seven factors of enlightenment. Now, here's the thing. Right there in the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha is talking about these seven factors of enlightenment. And here's how it works. In the beginning of the sutta, it shows how powerful and profound the sutta is, because he talks, the author talks about how many different groups are there. This is a big assembly. And it is almost like the entire university with all the deans and teachers and professors with their students. They come and listen to the teaching of the Buddha. So many of them are quite skilled at this. And so they understand exactly what he's talking about. And he's got so much ground to cover that the students then should be asking questions so that they can fill in. In other words, this is not a list. This is the whole book. And all you're getting is the chapter titles.
Yeah.
All right. And then he says this. He says that there are many groups here, those that are practicing jhana, those that are practicing metta. But this one I'm teaching you today, Anapanasati, is of great fruit. In other words, this is the one that the Buddha recommends above all of the other practices, is Anapanasati. Especially with that long, deep in-breath is number one. That's the first item on the list. Then the next thing he says is that it's of great fruit. And the reason or the rationale for practicing Anapanasati is for the fulfillment of the Satipatthana. Right, exactly, all right. We fulfill the Satipatthana in the sense that we know now the body, we know now the feelings, we know now the mind, and we're practicing Anapanasati so that we can fulfill this knowledge of what the mind is really like. Then the next item on the list is that we practice the Satipatthana for the fulfillment of the Sambojana, the seven factors of enlightenment. In other words, we get in touch with the body, the feeling, the mind, and the mind's objects, so that we can develop this sati to the point that it's unremitting. And so that unremitting mindfulness leads to unremitting right view or investigation. Or let's take a look at what's going on. Let's boogie down the road. Let's watch what's going on. All right. That leads to, it begins to get effortless, that there's no more effort in this, that is energetic instead. And then the next one is the factor of rapture or piti, which is all attitude. Now let's look at this for a moment.
Okay.
You have the eightfold noble path that has right view, right sati, right effort, and right attitude. And now you have the Sambojana.
Okay.
That starts with unremitting mindfulness, unremitting investigation, which is in fact one's right view, unremitting energy, which is one's right effort, and unremitting rapture, which is one's right attitude. And so,
Okay.
and so that's the answer to the question: why is it in the Satipatthana Sutta that it talks about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold
Okay.
Noble Path, but in the Anapanasati Sutta, he's talking about the seven factors of enlightenment? The answer is they're the same thing. And that we practice the seven factors of enlightenment then for the fulfillment of knowledge and deliverance. That's the freedom. Knowledge comes first.
Okay.
This is true in almost everything, and that is that you learn something really well until you eventually master it. That's the knowledge and deliverance. The more that you're knowledgeable about deliverance, then the more delivered you will become. Hang on a second. Going to send a message to Matt. Okay. Well, that didn't work. Okay. So, the knowledge brings deliverance. And you can see how that fits in with the 10 fetters. That the first fetters, the first 3 fetters, which bring us to a state of knowledge, then sets out the task at hand. And the task at hand are the higher fetters. And we'll talk about all of that stuff at a later time. But that's the reason that we practice Anapanasati, is for the fulfillment of the Satipatthana. We practice the Satipatthana for the fulfillment of the Sambhojana, the 7 factors. And then we practice the 7 factors for knowledge and deliverance. And in fact, in the Sutta number 117, just to make sure that the Buddha's got all his thoughts there together, at the end of that discussion of the Eightfold Noble Path, he makes it 10. He adds 2 additional steps. And what are those? Knowledge and deliverance.
Okay.
So knowledge and deliverance, the knowledge is the knowledge of the path, but the knowledge that we gain is the knowledge of walking the path.
Okay.
And whatever knowledge level that we're at, that's the level of deliverance. So that when full knowledge comes, full deliverance will come along. And so that's the entire teaching of the Buddha, and it's right there in the Anapanasati Sutta. The whole program is laid out, but it's better to look at it, because the funny part is that the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path are not even mentioned. And yet the entire description is there. Not only that, but that second noble truth, in the sense of the Satipatthana, the Paticca Samuppada.
Okay.
The Paticca Samuppada, which is actually buried in the Satipatthana, is not mentioned. However, if you're practicing Anapanasati correctly, you're actually practicing Anapanasati to see the Paticca Samuppada.
Yeah, you're actually going back in layers of conception. You're kind of going backward. You're deconstructing the experience, right?
Exactly so. Exactly. So that we begin to get out of concepts and out of language into direct experience. So, we've come to a good conclusion point. Do you have any questions about this?
Not much. Only if you have any recommendations for adjustments to the practice, or
I would say that yes, that you should follow the adjustments to the practice that I was mentioning right at the beginning. So go back
Okay.
and read and review this video.
All right.
But I'll give it to you succinctly again. Is that we have to practice long enough to really
Mm-hmm.
get the first jhana down.
Okay.
Which means that when we get the first jhana and we're getting it going, and then thoughts of boredom about it
Mm-hmm.
occur, we have to be able to see that with our sati quickly.
Okay.
So it does not take us out of the state of satisfaction, or if it does, then we should come back into a state of satisfaction. And we can do that with the thought of, aha, I
Mm.
caught you, Mr. Boredom. I am not going